The crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the grand ballroom of the Manhattan penthouse, and Clara Bennett stood at the edge of it all, invisible. She had spent 45 minutes nursing the same glass of sparkling water, watching the glittering crowd move around her like she was nothing more than furniture. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, slipped under her apartment door with no return address, just elegant calligraphy spelling her name and the promise of an evening that could change everything. Clara was a nursing student working double shifts at a Brooklyn diner to pay her rent. She had no business being here, among women draped in designer gowns and men whose watches cost more than her yearly salary. But the invitation had been persistent, arriving twice more after she ignored the first, and curiosity had finally won. Now she regretted it. She smoothed the fabric of her thrift store dress, a simple navy blue thing she had altered herself to fit her frame. It was elegant in its simplicity, but here, surrounded by haute couture and diamonds, she felt like a sparrow among peacocks. A woman in red silk brushed past her without a glance, nearly spilling champagne on Clara's sleeve. No apology came, just laughter directed elsewhere at someone more important. Clara set her glass on a passing tray and made her decision. She would leave. Whatever this invitation had promised, it clearly was not meant for someone like her. Perhaps it had been a mistake, a wrong address, a name confused with someone who actually belonged in this world. She moved toward the exit, weaving through clusters of conversation that parted around her without acknowledgement. The massive oak doors seemed impossibly far away, and with every step she felt smaller. What she did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that from the moment she entered, someone had been watching. Dominic Caruso stood on the mezzanine level, half hidden in shadow, his dark eyes tracking the woman in navy blue. He had noticed her immediately, not because of her beauty, though she possessed a quiet kind of loveliness that the painted faces below could never replicate, but because of her stillness. In a room full of performers, she was the only one not performing. He watched her stand alone for nearly an hour, watched the way she observed rather than participated, watched the subtle tightening of her shoulders each time someone looked through her. And he watched now, as she made her way toward the door, her chin lifted despite everything, refusing to let them see her defeated. Dominic was not a man who acted on impulse. He had built his empire through patience, through calculated moves and strategic silences. But something about this woman made him want to break his own rules. He descended the stairs. Clara had almost reached the door when a voice stopped her. Leaving so soon? She turned to find a man standing behind her, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from marble. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held an intensity that made her breath catch. "I do not think anyone will notice," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Something flickered in his expression. Amusement, perhaps, or something deeper. "I noticed." Clara did not know what to say to that. She was acutely aware of the space between them, of the way the noise of the party seemed to fade into background, static. "I should not have come," she admitted. "I do not belong here." The man tilted his head, studying her with an attention that felt almost physical. "And yet, here you are, in my home." The words took a moment to register. When they did, Clara felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "Your home?" "Dominic Caruso," he said, extending his hand. "I am the host of this evening's gathering." Clara stared at his hand like it might burn her. The host, the mysterious figure whose name had been whispered throughout the room with a mixture of reverence and fear. She had assumed he was some corporate titan, some Wall Street king. But the way people spoke of him, the careful deference in their voices, suggested something else entirely. She took his hand. His grip was firm but careful, and he held on a fraction longer than necessary. "Clara Bennett." "I know who you are." Her heart stuttered. "How?" "I sent the invitation." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara pulled her hand back, her mind racing. "Why, we have never met. I am nobody." Dominic's expression shifted, something like pain crossing his features before it was smoothed away. "You are not nobody. You are the woman who saved my mother's life." Clara blinked. "I do not understand." 6 months ago, Bellevue Hospital. An elderly woman was brought in after a heart incident. The doctors had written her off, but a nursing student on rotation refused to give up, stayed with her through the night, held her hand and talked to her until she stabilized. The memory surfaced slowly. Mrs. Romano, the frail woman with silver hair and kind eyes who had gripped Clara's hand and whispered prayers in Italian. "That was your mother?" "That was my mother. She speaks of you often. The angel in blue, she calls you." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. She had thought of Mrs. Romano many times since that night, had wondered if she was still alive, still fighting. "I was just doing my job." "No." Dominic's voice was soft but certain. "You were doing far more than that. You gave her hope when no one else would. You gave her a reason to keep breathing." Clara did not know how to respond. She had never expected to see any of those patients again, never expected her small acts of kindness to ripple outward into anything larger. "I wanted to thank you," Dominic continued, "to give you a night of beauty and celebration. But I see now that this world is not kind to those who deserve kindness. Most," he gestured at the glittering crowd behind them, and for the first time Clara saw contempt in his eyes. "These people," he said quietly, "they see only surface, only status. They looked at you and saw nothing, because they are nothing." Clara should have been offended on their behalf. Instead, she felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I should still go," she said, though the words felt less certain now. "Stay." It was not a command. It was a request, offered with a vulnerability that seemed foreign to a man who radiated power. "Why?" "Because I would like to know you, Clara Bennett, the woman beneath the angel." In that moment, standing at the threshold between two worlds, Clara made a choice that would change everything. She did not know that Dominic Caruso was one of the most powerful men in New York's criminal underworld. She did not know that his empire stretched from the docks of Brooklyn to the boardrooms of Manhattan. She did not know that choosing to stay would entangle her in a web of danger and devotion she could never have imagined. All she knew was that for the first time all evening, someone was looking at her like she mattered. "1 hour," she said. Dominic smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to almost boyish. "1 hour. Let me show you my home properly, without the vultures." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, Clara took it. They slipped through a side door, leaving the party behind, and entered a quieter wing of the penthouse. The private quarters were nothing like the ostentatious ballroom. Here the decor was warm and lived in, with bookshelves lining the walls and soft lighting casting golden shadows. Clara noticed photographs on a side table, a younger Dominic with his mother, an older man who must have been his father, a little girl with wild curls and a gap-toothed smile. "My niece," Dominic said, following her gaze. "Isabella. She is 7 years old and entirely convinced that she runs this family." Clara laughed, the sound surprising her. "She sounds wonderful." "She is. She is also the reason I do what I do." Clara looked at him, waiting for him to elaborate, but he simply moved to a small bar and poured 2 glasses of something amber. "Water is fine," she said. "It is apple cider, non-alcoholic. I do not drink." He handed her the glass, and their fingers brushed. Clara felt the contact like electricity. They sat in matching armchairs by a window that overlooked the glittering cityscape. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, unmarked by the tension Clara would have expected. "Tell me about yourself," Dominic said finally. "Not what you do, but who you are." No one had ever asked her that before. Clara found herself talking, really talking, in a way she had not done in years. She told him about growing up in a small Ohio town, about losing her parents in a car incident when she was 16, about the aunt who had taken her in and encouraged her dream of becoming a nurse. She told him about moving to New York with nothing but a suitcase and hope, about the struggle to survive in a city that devoured the unprepared, about the nights she had cried herself to sleep, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Dominic listened without interruption, his attention unwavering. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You have known pain," he said. "Real pain. The kind that shapes a person. Everyone has pain. Not everyone carries it with such grace." Clara looked down at her hands, uncomfortable with the praise. "I do not feel graceful. Most days I feel like I am barely holding on." That is what grace is, holding on when everything in you wants to let go. She met his eyes and found something there she had not expected. Understanding, kinship, the recognition of one survivor seeing another. "Your turn," she said. "Who are you, Dominic Caruso?" He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "That is a complicated question." "I have time." He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could handle. "I am a man who was born into a world he did not choose, a world of expectations and obligations that most people cannot imagine. I have done things I am not proud of to protect the people I love, and I have spent my entire adult life trying to build something better, something that might one day allow those I care about to live without fear." It was not the whole truth. Clara sensed that instinctively, but it was more truth than he probably gave most people. "That sounds lonely," she said. Dominic's expression flickered with surprise. "It is, more than I realized until just now." The hour passed without either of them noticing. They talked about books and music, about dreams and disappointments, about the small moments that made life bearable. Clara found herself laughing more than she had in months, found herself leaning forward to catch every word he spoke. When the clock struck midnight, she felt a pang of genuine regret. "I should go." Dominic nodded, though something in his posture suggested he felt the same reluctance. "Let me have my driver take you home." "That is not necessary." "Please, it would give me peace of mind." Clara hesitated, then nodded. She had learned to accept kindness when it was offered, even when her pride bristled. Dominic walked her to the private elevator, his hand hovering at the small of her back without quite touching. At the door, he paused. "I would like to see you again, Clara Bennett." "Why?" "Because tonight, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I did not feel like a king surrounded by subjects. I felt like a man having a conversation with a woman who sees him clearly. That is rarer than you know." Clara felt her heart pound against her ribs. Every instinct told her this was dangerous, that men like Dominic Caruso did not enter the lives of women like her without consequences. But another part of her, the part that had spent years playing it safe and ending up nowhere, whispered that maybe safety was overrated. "I work at the Starlight Diner on Atlantic Avenue," she heard herself say. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, afternoon shifts." Dominic smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Then I will see you on Tuesday, Clara." She stepped into the elevator, and as the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of him standing in the golden light, watching her with an expression she could not quite name. The drive home was a blur. Clara sat in the back of the sleek black car, staring out at the city lights, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She had gone to a party where she was invisible and left having captured the attention of the most powerful man in the room. She did not know what it meant. She did not know where it would lead. But as the car pulled up to her modest Brooklyn apartment building, Clara felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Possibility. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. These stories of unexpected connections and second chances are what bring us together. If you believe in the power of fate and want to follow Clara's journey with us, subscribe now and join our family. Your support means everything, and together we will discover where this story leads. The following Tuesday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made New York feel almost welcoming. Clara had spent the days between the party and her shift in a state of distracted anticipation, replaying her conversation with Dominic so many times that she had begun to doubt her own memory. Had it really happened? Had a man like that truly looked at her with such intensity, such genuine interest. By the time she tied her apron at the Starlight Diner, she had almost convinced herself that he would not come. Men like Dominic Caruso did not visit Brooklyn diners. They did not pursue nursing students who worked double shifts to pay rent. The whole thing had been a fever dream, a single beautiful night that would never repeat. She threw herself into work, taking orders with mechanical efficiency, refilling coffee cups, smiling at regulars who had become like family over her 2 years at the diner. The lunch rush came and went, and with every passing hour the knot of anticipation in her chest loosened into something like resignation. At 3:15, the bell above the door chimed. Clara looked up from the counter and felt the world stop. Dominic stood in the doorway, impossibly out of place in his tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes. Every head in the diner turned toward him, conversations faltering as people tried to process what they were seeing. But Dominic seemed oblivious to the attention. His eyes found Clara immediately, and he smiled, that rare, transformative smile that made him look almost gentle. "I believe you mentioned you work Tuesdays," he said, approaching the counter. Clara was dimly aware of her co-worker Maria gaping beside her, of old Mr. Patterson nearly dropping his coffee cup, of the absolute stillness that had descended over the normally chaotic diner. "I did not think you would actually come. I always keep my promises." He slid onto a stool at the counter, completely at ease despite the scrutiny. "What do you recommend?" Clara fumbled for her order pad. "The grilled cheese is good, and the apple pie is homemade." "Then I will have both." She turned to place the order, her hands trembling slightly. When she looked back, Dominic was watching her with that same intent focus from the party. "You look different here," he observed. "Because I am in uniform instead of a dress." "No, because you look at home, confident, like this is where you belong." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I do belong here. These people, this place, they took me in when I had nothing. The owner, Mrs. Kim, she gave me a chance when no one else would. Then I am grateful to Mrs. Kim. She is going to have a heart incident when she sees who I am serving." Dominic laughed, a genuine sound that turned more heads. Clara realized that the man who commanded fear and respect in the world she had glimpsed was also capable of this, of sitting at a sticky diner counter and laughing like anyone else. Over the next hour, between serving other customers and refilling drinks, Clara found moments to talk with Dominic. He asked about her studies, her patience, her dreams for the future. He asked about her favorite books, her favorite movies, the music she listened to when she needed comfort. And he listened to her answers like they were the most important words he had ever heard. She learned things about him too, that he had a degree in business from Columbia, that he had considered becoming a lawyer before family obligations intervened, that he loved Italian opera and hated modern art, that his favorite food was his mother's pasta fazool, and he had never successfully recreated the recipe. By the time her shift ended, Clara felt like she had known him for years instead of days. "Will you let me take you to dinner?" he asked as she untied her apron. "Is that a good idea?" "Probably not. But I find myself not caring." Clara should have said no. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was foolish, that she was playing with fire. But logic had never gotten her anything but loneliness. "There is a place a few blocks from here, Italian. Nothing fancy." "I know. Fancy. I would prefer authentic." They walked together through the autumn streets, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Dominic's security detail followed at a discreet distance, black cars keeping pace half a block behind, but Clara found she barely noticed them. The restaurant was a family-owned establishment called Lucia's, run by a grandmother from Naples and her 3 adult children. The tables were covered in red-checkered cloths, candles flickered in wine bottles, and the air smelled of garlic and fresh bread. Dominic's presence caused a stir here too, but of a different kind. The owner, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes, emerged from the kitchen and studied him for a long moment. "Caruso," she said flatly. "Mrs. DeLuca. Your father used to come here." "I know. He said your lasagna reminded him of home." Something in the woman's expression softened fractionally. "Sit. I will bring you something special." They were led to a private, corner table, partially hidden by a lattice divider covered in artificial grapevines. When they were seated, Clara looked at Dominic with new curiosity. "She knows you." "Her late husband worked for my father, many years ago." "Doing what?" Dominic held her gaze. "Things I am not proud to speak of." Clara absorbed that. The whispers she had heard at the party, the careful fear in people's voices when they spoke of him, the ever-present security that she was not supposed to notice, they all added up to a picture she had been avoiding looking at directly. "You are not just a businessman, are you?" "No." "Are you going to tell me what you are?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the edge of his water glass. "My family has been in New York for 4 generations. We built an empire from nothing, brick by brick, through means that the law does not recognize. My father ran that empire until his passing 5 years ago. Now, I run it." Clara felt her heart rate quicken, but she did not look away. "And what does that mean, running it?" "It means I oversee operations that most people only read about in newspapers, import and export, real estate, financial services. Some of it is legitimate now, more than half in fact. But the foundation, the core of what we are, that exists in shadows. You are telling me you are a crime boss. I am telling you that I am the head of my family. And in our world, that title carries weight that cannot be separated from the history. That built it." Clara should have been frightened. She should have excused herself, walked out, never looked back. But as she sat across from this man who was offering her truth instead of comfortable lies, she felt something unexpected. Respect. "Why are you telling me this? Most people in your position would hide it. Because you deserve to know what you are getting involved with. Because my mother raised me to believe that deception is the cruelest form of disrespect. And because if you choose to walk away after tonight, I would rather it be based on truth than on a fantasy that would eventually crumble." Mrs. DeLuca arrived with plates of food neither of them had ordered, antipasto and fresh bread, and the interruption gave Clara a moment to think. When the woman left, Clara picked up a piece of bruschetta and took a bite, buying herself another moment. "You said more than half your business is legitimate now. Is that changing?" Dominic nodded. "It is my life's work to make it. So, by the time my niece is grown, I want her to inherit an empire that operates entirely within the law. I want her to never have to make the choices I have made." "And what about until then?" "Until then, I do what is necessary to keep my people safe, to protect those who depend on me. Some of those things would make you think less of me." "I work in emergency medicine," Clara said quietly. "I have held the hands of people who have done terrible things. I have watched them cry for their mothers. I have learned that no one is only one thing." Dominic stared at her like she had said something miraculous. "You are not what I expected, Clara Bennett." "What did you expect?" "Fear. Judgment. The same reactions I have received my entire life. I have enough fear in my life without adding more, and I am in no position to judge anyone." Dinner continued in a lighter vein, though the weight of what had been shared remained present. Clara learned that Dominic's father had been a harsh man, that his mother had been the one to teach him gentleness, that he had a younger sister who had died in an incident before his niece was born, that little Isabella was his sister's child, left in his care when she had no one else. She learned that he read philosophy to fall asleep, that he woke at 5 every morning to exercise, that he had never taken a vacation in his adult life, that the closest he came to peace was visiting his mother on Sundays and letting her fuss over whether he was eating enough. And Clara found herself sharing things too, the nightmares she still had about her parents passing, the guilt she carried for surviving when they did not, the way she threw herself into work because stillness felt too much like drowning. By the time they left the restaurant, the sky had turned to velvet and the streets had emptied. Dominic's car appeared as if by magic, but he waved it off. "Walk with me?" They strolled through Brooklyn in the autumn darkness, past brownstones and bodegas, through patches of streetlight and stretches of shadow. At some point, Dominic's hand found hers, and Clara let him take it. "This is dangerous," she said softly. Yes. I should not be doing this. No. But I do not want to stop. Dominic stopped walking and turned to face her. In the dim light, his features were half hidden, but his eyes burned with intensity. Neither do I. And that terrifies me more than anything I have faced in my entire life. Clara reached up and touched, his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He closed his eyes at the contact, and she saw vulnerability there that she suspected very few people had ever witnessed. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now, I do something I have never done before." "What is that?" "I ask you to trust me, not because of what I can give you or what I can do for you, but because of who I am when I am with you. I ask you to take a chance on a man who does not deserve it." Clara thought about everything she had heard, everything she had seen, everything she sensed lurking beneath the surface. She thought about the warnings she should heed and the fear she should feel. Then she thought about the way he looked at her, the way he listened, the way he had driven all the way to Brooklyn just to eat grilled cheese at a diner because she worked there. "I trust you," she said, and she meant it. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Clara was afraid to wake from. Dominic became a constant presence in her life, appearing at the diner with gifts of coffee and pastries from her favorite bakery, picking her up after class to drive her home, texting her goodnight messages that she read and reread until the words blurred. He introduced her properly to his mother, and Mrs. Caruso embraced Clara like a long-lost daughter, weeping with gratitude and insisting she stay for dinner. Clara learned to make pasta from scratch under the older woman's patient instruction, learned the family recipes that had been passed down for generations, learned what it felt like to be part of something larger than herself. She met Isabella, too, the wild-haired 7-year-old who ruled the Caruso household with an iron will and a dimpled smile. Isabella decided within 5 minutes that Clara was acceptable and demanded to show her every room in the penthouse, chattering constantly about school and her best friend Sophie and the puppy she was certain Uncle Dom would eventually buy her. Clara watched Dominic with his niece and felt her heart crack open. The dangerous man she had heard whispered about transformed completely in Isabella's presence, getting down on his knees to examine her crayon drawings with serious attention, letting her paint his nails a garish pink, reading her bedtime stories in silly voices that made her giggle uncontrollably. "She loves you," Clara observed one evening, after Isabella had finally been convinced to go to sleep. "She is the best thing in my life. Her and my mother. Everything I do for them." Clara understood then, truly understood what drove him. It was not power or greed or the thrill of danger. It was love, fierce and protective, and willing to walk through fire to keep those he cherished safe. She began to see his world more clearly. The men who surrounded him were loyal because he had earned that loyalty, not through fear, but through fairness. He remembered their children's birthdays, visited their wives when they were sick, made sure their families were provided for. The empire he ran was brutal in its origins, but operated now with a code of honor that the legitimate world often lacked. Of course, there were shadows she could not ignore. Dominic was careful to keep the darker aspects of his business away from her, but Clara was observant. She noticed the late-night phone calls that made his jaw tighten. She noticed the bruises his men sometimes carried, quickly hidden and never explained. She noticed the way certain names made the room go cold. One evening, 6 weeks into their relationship, Clara arrived at the penthouse to find Dominic in his study, standing at the window with his back to the door. His posture was rigid, his reflection in the glass showing an expression she had never seen before. "What happened?" He did not turn. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Dominic." Her tone made him look at her then, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes and something that might have been grief. "One of my men was hurt. Tonight." "Marco?" "He has 2 children under 5. His wife is 7 months pregnant with their 3rd. Clara crossed to him without thinking, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her cheek to his back. "Will he be all right?" "He will recover." But the men who hurt him, they were sending a message. To me. What kind of message? Dominic turned in her arms, pulling her close. That there are those who want what I have built, and they are willing to hurt innocent people to take it. Clara felt fear then, cold and sharp, but she did not let go. What will you do? What I have always done. Protect my people, whatever that requires. She did not ask what that meant. She was not sure she wanted to know. But she understood, in that moment, that loving Dominic Caruso meant accepting that his world operated by different rules, and she had to decide if she could live with that. Over the following days, Clara noticed changes. Security around the penthouse doubled. Dominic's phone calls became more frequent, his meetings longer. He insisted she move into a guest room at the penthouse, citing safety concerns, and though Clara resisted at first, the genuine worry in his eyes convinced her. Living in close quarters with Dominic revealed new dimensions of him. She saw how little he slept, how heavily responsibility weighed on him, how desperately he craved moments of normalcy that his position rarely allowed. She saw him pace the halls at 3 in the morning, saw him sit by Isabella's bed for hours after nightmares, saw him hold his mother's hand during Sunday dinners, like he was memorizing the feeling. She fell deeper in love with every revelation. One night, unable to sleep, Clara found him in the library, surrounded by old photographs spread across a mahogany desk. He looked up when she entered, and for once he did not try to hide the pain in his eyes. "Who are they?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "My father, my sister, people who are gone, now." Clara picked up a photograph of a young woman with Dominic's eyes and Isabella's smile. She was beautiful. Valentina. She was 5 years younger than me, the light of our family. What happened to her? Dominic was quiet for a long moment. She fell in love with the wrong man, a man who seemed kind but was hiding darkness. By the time we realized how dangerous he was, it was too late. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I am so sorry. I failed her. I was supposed to protect her, and I failed. It is a mistake I will never make again." Clara understood then why he was so careful with her, so insistent on knowing where she was and who she was with. It was not control, it was terror of losing someone else he loved. She took his hand. "You are not going to lose me. You cannot promise that. I can promise that I am not going anywhere. That whatever comes, I want to face it with you." Dominic looked at her like she had offered him salvation. "Why? Why would you choose this life? You could have anyone, Clara. Someone normal, someone safe. I do not want safe, I want you. All of you, including the parts you think are too dark to love." He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of unspoken words. And Clara knew that there was no going back. She had chosen her path, and it led directly into the heart of his storm. The next weeks brought both joy and tension. Clara continued her studies, supported by Dominic's quiet insistence on paying her tuition despite her protests. She grew closer to Mrs. Caruso and Isabella, becoming part of the fabric of their daily lives, and she learned to navigate the strange reality of loving a man whose phone calls could end with casual discussions of violence. She also learned that enemies were circling. The attack on Marco had been the beginning, not the end. A rival organization, led by a man named Victor Castellano, was making aggressive moves into Caruso territory. There were confrontations Clara heard about only in fragments, late-night discussions between Dominic and his lieutenants that stopped whenever she entered the room. She tried not to let fear consume her. She focused on her patients, on her studies, on the small moments of happiness that still existed. But the shadow of danger grew darker with each passing day. One afternoon, Clara was leaving the hospital after a shift when she noticed a black car that did not belong to Dominic's fleet, parked across the street. A man leaned against it, watching her with cold eyes. She called Dominic immediately. 15 minutes later, she was surrounded by his men, whisked into an armored vehicle and driven to the penthouse at high speed. Dominic was waiting when she arrived, his face pale with barely controlled rage. "Did he approach you?" Did he say anything? No, he just watched. Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. This is my fault. I brought you into this world, and now they are using you to get to me. It is not your fault. I chose this. You chose love. You did not choose to become a target. Clara pulled back to look at him. What are we going to do? We are going to end this. Castellano has been a threat for too long. It is time to remind him why the Caruso family has survived for a century. There was something in his voice, something cold and final, that made Clara's blood chill. But she did not try to talk him out of it. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that mercy had limits, and that protecting the people you loved sometimes required becoming the monster others feared. That night, lying in bed beside Dominic in the quiet hours before dawn, Clara made a decision. Whatever was coming, she would not run. She would not hide. She would stand beside the man she loved and face whatever darkness tried to tear them apart. This is the part of the story where I need you to do something important. If you have been touched by Clara's journey, if you believe that love can find us in the most unexpected places, take a moment and leave a comment saying, "True love knows no boundaries." I want to see how many of you believe that connection can transcend every obstacle. Your words matter more than you know. The war with Victor Castellano came to a head 3 days later. Clara would remember that morning forever, the way golden sunlight had streamed through the penthouse windows, the smell of Mrs. Caruso's coffee brewing in the kitchen, the sound of Isabella's laughter as she showed off a new dance she had learned at school. It had seemed so normal, so peaceful, that Clara had almost convinced herself the danger was passing. Then Dominic's phone rang. She watched the color drain from his face as he listened, watched his hand tighten around the device until his knuckles went white. When? A pause. How many? He ended the call and stood frozen for a moment, a statue carved from ice and fury. What happened? Clara whispered. Castellano made his move. He took 3 of my warehouses overnight, injured 12 of my men. He looked at her, and behind the rage she saw fear. He also sent a message, photographs of you, Clara, leaving work, walking to the diner, sitting in the park near your apartment. He knows everywhere you go. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. What does he want? Me, my territory, my empire, and he thinks threatening you will make me weak. Will it? Dominic crossed to her in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. It makes me more dangerous than he can possibly imagine. No one threatens the people I love. No one. The days that followed were a blur of activity and tension. Clara was confined to the penthouse, her movements restricted, her every moment watched by a rotation of guards. She chafed at the confinement but understood its necessity. Dominic came and went at odd hours, each time looking more exhausted, more burdened by the weight of what was happening. She tried to help where she could. She comforted Mrs. Caruso, who prayed constantly and lit candles to saints Clara did not know. She distracted Isabella with games and stories, shielding the little girl from the fear that permeated every corner of their world. She made sure Dominic ate when he forgot, slept when he could, felt her love even when words failed. On the 4th night, Dominic came to her room just past midnight. His shirt was torn, his knuckles raw, and there was a cut above his eye that made Clara's nursing instinct surge. "Sit down," she ordered, already reaching for the first aid kit she kept in her bedside table. He sat on the edge of the bed, silent and still, as she cleaned and bandaged his wounds. When she finished, he caught her wrist gently. "I do not deserve you. That is not for you to decide. Clara, if anything happens to me, I need you to take Isabella and my mother and go. There are arrangements made, money set aside, a place where you will be safe. Nothing is going to happen to you. You do not know that. I know that I will not plan for a future without you in it. I refuse." Dominic pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her neck. "How did I find you? In all the world, how did I find someone like you? You threw a party. I crashed it. Here we are." He laughed despite everything, a broken sound that was half sob. Clara held him tighter, wishing she could absorb his pain, wishing she could fight his battles for him. "Tell me we are going to survive this," she whispered. "We are going to survive this, and when it is over I am going to marry you, Clara Bennett. In a church with my mother crying in the front row and Isabella throwing flowers. I am going to make you my wife, and I am going to spend the rest of my life earning the gift of your love." Clara felt tears slide down her cheeks. "Is that a proposal?" "It is a promise. The proposal comes when I can give you the ring you deserve, when I can kneel before you without enemies at our door. I do not need a ring, but you will have one. You will have everything, I swear it." They held each other through the long night, speaking of the future as if speaking it could make it real. Clara learned that Dominic wanted 4 children, a house upstate with room for horses, Sunday dinners large enough to need 2 tables. She told him she wanted to open a clinic for underserved communities, wanted to grow old arguing about whose turn it was to cook, wanted to watch their grandchildren play in a garden she had planted herself. By dawn, they had built a whole life together in words, and both of them were determined to live long enough to make those words reality. The confrontation with Castellano came 2 days later. Clara was not present for what happened, but she pieced together the story from fragments and whispers. Dominic had arranged a meeting, ostensibly to negotiate, but Victor Castellano had never intended to talk. He had come with armed men, with violence in his heart, with plans to end the Caruso line once and for all. What he had not counted on was the loyalty Dominic inspired. Castellano's own people turned on him, men who had been working secretly for Dominic for months, feeding information, waiting for the right moment. The confrontation was brief and decisive. Victor Castellano was apprehended and handed over to federal contacts Dominic had cultivated for exactly this purpose. Evidence of his crimes compiled over years ensured he would spend decades behind bars. It was over. Dominic came home that night without a scratch, but Clara could see the toll the day had taken. He sat in the library for hours, staring at nothing, and when she finally convinced him to come to bed, he held her like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. "It is done," he said finally. "Castellano will never threaten anyone again." "How do you feel?" He considered the question seriously. Relieved, exhausted, determined. Determined? To build something. Better from the ashes. To become the man you believe I can be. To leave my niece a legacy she can be proud of. Clara kissed his forehead, his eyelids, the corner of his mouth. "You already are that man. You just need to believe it." In the weeks that followed, Clara watched Dominic transform. With the threat of Castellano eliminated, he threw himself into legitimizing his operations with renewed purpose. Business deals that had been delayed moved forward. Partnerships with legal enterprises expanded. The empire began to shift from shadow to light, slowly but unmistakably. Mrs. Caruso started planning a wedding she had not been officially told about, buying magazines and leaving them strategically around the penthouse. Isabella demanded to be the flower girl and began practicing her walk daily, usually with the family cat serving as reluctant ring-bearer. And Clara found herself, for the first time in her life, truly happy. She graduated from her nursing program with honors, Dominic, and his family cheering louder than anyone in the auditorium. She accepted a position at a community health center in the Bronx, finally doing the work she had dreamed of. She moved officially into the penthouse, converting the guest room into a small study where she could work on patient files and research. Life became beautifully ordinary. They had Sunday dinners with Mrs. Caruso, where too much food was always prepared, and Dominic was scolded for working too hard. They took Isabella to Central Park on weekends, watching her run through fallen leaves and chase pigeons. They stayed up late talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in the small details that intimacy reveals. One evening, 3 months after Castellano's arrest, Dominic came home early with an unusual lightness in his step. "I have something to show you." He drove her out of the city into the countryside of Westchester, where autumn had painted the trees in gold and crimson. They wound through narrow roads until they reached a gate. beyond which sat a stone house with ivy climbing its walls and a garden that sprawled toward the horizon. "What is this place?" "Our home, if you want it." Clara stared at him, then at the house, then back at him. "You bought a house." "I bought our future, the place where we will raise our children, where my mother can have the garden she has always wanted, where Isabella can have the dog she has been demanding." Clara got out of the car and walked toward the house in a daze. It was everything she had described during those long nights of whispered dreams, a rambling structure with character and warmth, surrounded by land enough for horses and trees old enough to have stories. Dominic followed her, watching her reaction with anxious hope. "We do not have to keep it. If you do not like it, we can find something else." Clara turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. It is absolutely perfect." He smiled, the full, unguarded smile she had learned to cherish. "Then there is just one more thing." He dropped to one knee. Clara's hands flew to her mouth as Dominic pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside sat a ring, elegant and beautiful, with a diamond that caught the fading light and scattered it into rainbows. "Clara Bennett, you walked into my life on a night when I had everything and nothing. You saw past the power and the reputation and found the man I had forgotten I could be. You have given me hope, given my family joy, given my heart a home it never knew it needed." His voice cracked and he paused to gather himself. "I am not a perfect man. I have done things that would make lesser people turn away. But I swear to you, on everything I am and everything I hope to become, that I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me?" Clara sank to her knees in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they knelt together in the grass as the sun set behind the house that would become their home. When he kissed her, Clara tasted joy and promise, and the sweet certainty that some stories, against all odds, get their happy endings. The wedding took place on a perfect day in May, the grounds of the Westchester estate transformed into a garden of white roses and golden light. Clara walked down the aisle in a simple gown that made her feel like a princess toward the man who had changed everything. Dominic waited at the altar with tears in his eyes, unashamed and unconcerned with the crowd watching. His mother sat in the front row, weeping openly into a handkerchief. Isabella performed her flower girl duties with the solemnity of a general leading troops into battle, scattering petals with precise determination. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. They spoke vows they had written themselves, promises of partnership and patience, of laughter and loyalty, of building a life that honored both the darkness they had survived and the light they had found in each other. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the gathered guests shook the trees. Dominic kissed Clara like the world was ending and beginning all at once, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, not caring who saw. The reception was everything Mrs. Caruso had dreamed of. Tables groaning with food, music that got even the most stoic guests dancing, toasts that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Clara danced with her new husband, with his mother, with little Isabella standing on her feet and giggling as they swayed. Late in the evening, as the party wound down and guests began to drift away, Clara found a quiet moment alone on the terrace. The garden stretched before her, moonlit and magical, and she allowed herself to simply breathe. Dominic found her there, as he always did. "Mrs. Caruso," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How does it feel?" "Like a dream I'm afraid to wake from." "Then let us never wake up." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. "I have been thinking," Dominic said eventually, "about the future. We have a lot of future to think about. I want to accelerate the transition, get out of the remaining shadow businesses within the year, not 5. I want to be completely legitimate before our first child is born." Clara turned in his arms. "Our first child? Unless you have objections." She smiled, a secret playing at the corners of her lips. "As it happens, we may need to accelerate that timeline." Dominic went very still. "Clara, I was going to tell you tomorrow. Make it romantic. But I cannot wait." She took his hand and pressed it to her stomach. "You are going to be a father." For a long moment, Dominic did not react. Then his face crumpled, and he pulled her into an embrace so tight she could barely breathe. "Are you certain?" "I confirmed it yesterday, about 8 weeks along." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with tears. "A baby, our baby, our baby." He laughed, a wild, joyful sound, and swung her in a circle that made her shriek and cling to his shoulders. When he set her down, he was already talking rapidly. "We need to find the best doctors, and redesign the nursery, and hire additional security, and tell my mother immediately, because she will never forgive us if she finds out we knew at the wedding and did not share. Dominic. And we should probably move the transition timeline up even more, maybe 6 months instead of a year. Dominic. And Isabella will be so excited. She has been asking for a baby since she learned where they come from, which was a very awkward conversation, by the way." "Dominic," he stopped, finally meeting her eyes. "Breathe," she said gently. "We have time. We have so much time." He exhaled slowly, then smiled with a wonder that made him look like a boy. "I love you, Clara, more than I have ever loved anything. I love you too. Now let us go tell your mother before she guesses on her own." Mrs. Caruso's reaction was exactly what they expected: tears and prayers and immediate phone calls to every relative within shouting distance. Isabella's reaction was even better: a shriek of joy followed by a detailed list of names she considered acceptable, none of which were traditional. The months of pregnancy passed in a blur of happiness and preparation. Clara continued working at the clinic until her 7th month, finally allowing herself to rest only when Dominic's concern became impossible to ignore. They finished renovating the Westchester house, creating a nursery painted in soft yellows and filled with more stuffed animals than any child could possibly need. Dominic kept his promise about the business. By the time Clara entered her 3rd trimester, the last of the shadow operations had been closed or sold. The Caruso empire was, for the first time in its century-long history, entirely legitimate. It was a transformation that had seemed impossible when they first met, but love had a way of making the impossible achievable. Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning, delivered in a private suite with Dominic holding Clara's hand through every moment. She was perfect, a tiny bundle of warmth and wonder, with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Valentina, after the sister Dominic had lost. Mrs. Caruso wept for hours when she heard. Bringing Valentina home to the Westchester house felt like completing a circle. Clara stood in the nursery, holding her daughter against her chest, watching snow fall outside the window, and marveled at how far she had come. A year and a half ago, she had been a struggling student invisible at a party. Now she was a wife, a mother, part of a family that had chosen her as fiercely as she had chosen them. Dominic appeared in the doorway, having finally convinced his mother to stop fussing and rest. "She is asleep." "Finally. Your mother wanted to hold her for another hour." "My mother would hold her forever if we let her." He crossed to join them, wrapping his arms around Clara and their daughter, creating a circle of warmth against the winter cold. "Thank you," he murmured into Clara's hair. "For what?" "For giving me this. All of this. A life I never thought I could have." Clara leaned back against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "We gave it to each other." They stayed that way as the snow fell and the house settled into peaceful silence. Outside, the world continued its chaos, its struggles, its endless cycle of joy and sorrow. But here, in this moment, there was only love and the promise of all the years stretching ahead. 5 years later, the Westchester estate had transformed into a place of laughter and light. Valentina, now a spirited child with her father's intensity and her mother's compassion, ruled the household with the same determination Isabella had once shown. Isabella herself was 12 now navigating the turbulent waters of adolescence with grace and occasional dramatics that kept everyone entertained. Mrs. Caruso had moved into the guest house on the property, close enough to spoil her grandchildren daily, but independent enough to maintain her dignity. She had finally gotten her garden, and it had grown into something magnificent, a riot of color and scent that attracted butterflies and brought her endless joy. Clara had opened her clinic, not in the Bronx as originally planned, but in a nearby community that needed services desperately. She had hired a staff of dedicated professionals and built something she was genuinely proud of, a place where people received care regardless of their ability to pay. And Dominic had become someone even he had not believed possible. The legitimate business empire he had built employed thousands and contributed millions to charitable causes. He sat on boards of hospitals and universities, his name now associated with philanthropy rather than fear. The whispers that once accompanied him had faded, replaced by respect earned through years of honest work. But he was still the man who had protected her from the beginning, still capable of the fierce devotion that had first made her love him. On the morning of their 5th anniversary, Clara woke to find him already up, standing at the window watching the sun rise over the hills. She joined him, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking about? That night at the party? How you almost walked away?" "I did walk away. You stopped me." "What if I had not?" Clara considered the question seriously. "Then I would have gone home to my tiny apartment and eaten leftover Chinese food and fallen asleep watching reruns. And I would have spent my whole life not knowing what I was missing." Dominic turned to face her, his expression soft. "I would have found you eventually. I'm certain of that. Our paths would have crossed again. You cannot know that. I can, because I believe that some people are meant to find each other. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many wrong turns they make, they find their way home." Clara smiled and rose on her toes to kiss him. "Happy anniversary, husband." "Happy anniversary, wife." Their celebration was quiet, by choice, a family dinner with everyone they loved gathered around the table. Mrs. Caruso made her famous lasagna. Isabella presented a scrapbook she had been secretly compiling for months, filled with photographs and memories from every year of Clara and Dominic's relationship. Valentina sang a song she had learned in school, only slightly off-key, and received a standing ovation. Later, after the children were in bed and the house had settled into sleepy quiet, Clara and Dominic walked through the garden in the moonlight. The roses were in bloom, their scent heavy in the summer air, and fireflies danced, like tiny stars among the flowers. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked. "Giving up the power, the influence?" "Not for a single moment. The power I have now is different. It is the power to sleep peacefully, to look my children in the eyes without shame, to know that what I have built will outlast me in ways that matter. There is no comparison." Clara squeezed his hand. "I am proud of you. I am proud of us. What we have built together is more than I ever dared to dream." They stopped at a bench beneath an old oak tree, the same spot where they had sat on their first night in this house, planning a future that had seemed impossibly bright. "Tell me about the next 5 years," Clara said, settling against his side. Dominic smiled, that rare, unguarded smile she cherished. "Valentina will start school and probably take over within a week. Isabella will get her driver's license and terrify everyone on the road. My mother will finally finish writing her cookbook and insist we publish it. The clinic will expand, maybe add a second location. And us? We will grow older together. We will argue about small things and agree about important ones. We will watch our children become people we are proud of. We will have good days and hard days and ordinary days that somehow become the most precious of all." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming rightness of everything. "I want that. All of it. Then it is yours. It is ours." They sat in comfortable silence as the moon traced its arc across the sky. Somewhere in the house, a light flickered on and off, probably Isabella sneaking a late-night snack. In the distance, an owl called to its mate. The world continued its eternal turning, indifferent and beautiful and full of possibility. Clara thought about the woman she had been, invisible at a party full of strangers, certain she did not belong. She thought about all the moments that had brought her here, the choices and chances and acts of courage she had not known she possessed. She thought about the man beside her, the man who had seen her when no one else did, who had chosen her and kept choosing her every day since. "Thank you," she said softly. Dominic looked at her. "For what?" "For seeing me. That first night when everyone else looked right through me, you saw me. How could I not? You were the only real thing in a room full of pretenders, the only honest heart in a sea of masks. I was terrified. I know. I watched you tremble. And I watched you lift your chin anyway, watched you refuse to let them break you. That is when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you were exactly what I had been waiting for my entire life." Clara turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. "I love you, Dominic Caruso. I loved you when it was dangerous, and I love you now that it is peaceful. I will love you when we are old and grey and cannot remember where we put our reading glasses. I will love you forever." Forever is a long time. Not long enough. He kissed her then, tender and deep, a promise renewed in the silver moonlight. And when they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The story that had begun with invisibility had ended with a love so visible it lit up everything it touched. The woman who had walked away from a lavish party had found something no amount of money could buy. The man who had built an empire from shadows had learned that the greatest power was simply being seen and loved for who he truly was. And they lived not happily ever after, because that is the stuff of fairy tales, but fully, with all the mess and magic and mundane miracles that make up a real life, with arguments that ended in laughter and challenges that made them stronger and moments of grace that took their breath away. They lived and they loved, and they built something that would outlast them both.